Hello, everybody!
Turn us up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up? Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today.
Oh.
That is right. Because today we are talking about one of our favorites. This is a series and this is an author that we have gone into such depth that I don't know. I feel like we've become like champions for this series, even though it doesn't really need it. It's already incredibly popular. Yeah. But I just feel like we are huge proponents of this series, and I love talking about it. I love being in this world. We put it aside for a while, and I've missed it. I'm happy to be back in, and that means, of course, we are talking about Joe Abercrombie's First Law universe, but we are now into the standalones.
Yeah, and I've been super pumped to get to talk about just everything, really. As I've said a few times before, I think that Joe Abercrombie just gets better and better as in my read of the series. I've enjoyed basically every book more than the last, and I've read them a few times already, each of them, and we're getting toward these standalones where he's telling these complete stories, and it's just so awesome to see him deliver on a theme and wrap things up in one book in such a satisfying way. So that being said, we will be only covering some of our best served cold coverage today.
That was going to be my seg.
We have so much. Yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes. There will be a satisfying end to our episodes at some point. Not my best. But
no.
Point being,
Joe Abercrombie was able to tell a complete story in one book, but we will not be telling a complete. Yeah, we won't be covering that story in one podcast. We plan to do one podcast episode.
We'll do it in the podcast.
We'll do it in this one podcast, this one show, but it will be 2 episodes. And we're thinking 2, but definitely not 1. Yes. And that's where we're coming from. That was my segue. That was going to be my segue. You had set me up, and then you had kept going for it. But we did. We got there eventually, and that is what matters. And it's an exciting day. Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie, Part 1. We're going to get approximately halfway through the story, and I'm excited to get into it. But first, Dylan, you have got something to say, right?
I always have something to say, Charles. And this time it is that even though we're probably only going to cover about the first half of Best Served Cold, we will not be holding back when it comes to spoilers for Best Served Cold in total as a novel. So if you haven't read that yet, then now's a great time to pick it up. And I'll also say we won't hold back with the original trilogy when it comes to spoilers, which I think in part is very fair, because even if you haven't read the original trilogy, if you read Best Served Cold, Abercrombie doesn't hold back with spoilers about things that have happened in the original trilogy really either. So we're going to treat it with that way. So First Law Trilogy, that is The Blade itself, Before They're Hanged, Last Argument of Kings, and then Best Served Cold. Those things will have spoilers in this episode, but we will not spoil beyond that, especially because Charles hasn't read beyond Best Served Cold yet.
This is my second read of Best Served Cold, and once we get through this, in our next episode we do Best Served Cold, it is the Wild West for me. I'm so excited to get into the
especially
heroes
Red
and
Country,
Red Country
will be the Wild West.
Yeah.
because it is Red Country as a Western will be the Wild West for you, Charles. But all right, let's I forgot to say, so turn it down in your headphones
There
if
we go.
you
That would have been a bummer if
have
we
not
missed
yet
that.
read Best Served Cold. Yeah, it would have been a bummer. But let's get into this, Charles. We've had them wait long enough. I think that it's time to get into this.
Yes, let's get into it right away. So, Best Served Cold, as the name implies, is a revenge story. And the need for this revenge comes, the inciting incident comes right here. It's like Abercrombie hits you with it right at the beginning. We have Monza, our main character, and her brother Benna, or Benner, however you say it, Benna, and visit their employer, the Grand Duke Orso of Talons, and they are betrayed. They are stabbed, strangled, thrown off a mountain, and that is what starts this whole thing off, because Monza survives, doesn't she, Dylan?
She does survive, and my first read, and in subsequent reads too, this has always made me think about Kill Bill. Yeah. Does that ever come up for you?
It is very Kill Bill-esque, I agree.
Yeah, but this moment, it goes to show what I view as Joe Abercrombie's growth as an author here, because he just gets right into it, where we love the Blade itself, and the biggest complaint that we usually hear from folks about the Blade itself is it just hardly anything happens in the whole book, which we're fine with because we love spending time with the characters. But I think that here we immediately get grounded in not just incredible characters with Monza right off the bat and these other interesting folks that we don't know a ton about yet at this point in the story, but the stakes are very clear very immediately, and it's a brutal scene.
Yes.
And absolutely horrible stuff that happens to Monza, but it's this interesting chapter where basically Benna, the chapter is called, I think, Benna Mercato Saves a Life, I think is what the chapter is called, something of that nature.
Right.
And the way, and so it's classic Abercrombie that he calls it Benna Mercato Saves a Life, and then the way that Benna saves her life is that he basically makes her fall, like, what's the right word for it? Like, helps make her fall, not, God, what's the word for that, Charles?
Breaks her fall?
Breaks her fall, yes. Breaks her fall with his body. With his body. And it's absolutely brutal, and we immediately see a character who seemed like they had everything at the start of the story, this incredible commander in Monza, and she has this close relationship with Benna, and that's all taken away from her at once.
That's right. You know you're getting into a revenge story, but in some ways I still kind of felt unprepared for this moment when it happens, you know, because it's just the severity in which this book goes from 0 to 100 with its violence sometimes. I just am so fascinated by, because this whole story is about like the price of revenge, the cost of revenge, is revenge worth it, and things like that. So when it gets to the points where it gets violent, it almost gets very serious. And in some cases it inspires the character, and in some cases it like scares them. And it's interesting to see how these peak moments of violence happen throughout the series, and how Monza's character changes and other characters that we get along the way change. And this is the first one, and it plays out in a very traditional way, which I believe is a very calculated way, because we want to buy into Monza on her quest for revenge at the beginning of this story.
Yeah.
And it is well earned here. We get to watch her, watch her brother get murdered in front of her eyes, the only family she's ever had and the only person she's ever loved, really. And then she's getting betrayed by her employer. She had everything. Like you said, she had a giant, beautiful jewel and family and a prestige, and now it's all gone. And she's left recovering with, what is his name at this moment? Is it the Bone Thief? The Bone Man?
Oh, yeah. Well, we can spoil who that is. It's
Yes.
Shanked, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. So we don't have to hold back. But it is, at this point, we have no idea who this character is. He just seems like some sort of mad scientist that is into the idea of fixing up Monza for, it just seems like he enjoys it. He's getting a kick out of this idea, and he's interested in the idea that she's alive and likes the idea of almost experimenting on her to see if he can revive her, and he's able to pull it off. It's a very strange scene, but
it's almost
makes
like
sense in the context of
it's almost like a fever dream kind of moment in this book where she's with this guy and this guy's like explaining all the stuff that he's done to her and is pointing around. It's kind of funny. I almost read this like it was an old man, poking around and describing it, like all the things that he changed for her, and it's so much fun. But my favorite piece about all of this is that Monza just, first chance she gets, she escapes and she just leaves, and we never see this guy again. And that's something I was like, well, that we know of. Yeah, I mean, he comes back in a reveal moment, but
yes.
The point is, that character's written out of history, and she's off on her own adventure and doesn't even give him another iota of thought. Basically, it's like, well, thanks for nothing. I'm out of here, and she bails and never thinks about him again. Too, it's very interesting. But I just love that moment and that decision, and it speaks to Monza's character, and it speaks to Abercrombie's tone that he's setting in this world of like, you don't need to like hang out just because this guy healed you. Like, you're healed now. You could leave if you wanted to. And I just think that that's such a fun, like, grim, dark, kind of subversive moment that speaks true to Monza's character.
Yeah, Charles, I completely agree. I've said a lot of times that one of my favorite character traits is when folks are extremely proactive.
Right.
And that's something I love about Monza as a character, is she very quickly, when she's in this situation, is like, okay, well, I don't want to be experimented on by some dude who's getting his jollies out of putting a coin in my head.
Yeah.
So as soon as I have any opportunity to escape, I will take that opportunity, even if it means crawling, even if it means the most pain that I have ever experienced before in my life. I'm going to get the hell out of here.
Right.
And immediately we're grounded in this idea of Monza as a character who we understand how she's the kind of person who was able to rise to the position that we knew she had, such an impressive mercenary leader.
Right. And I just think Monza's an interesting character as we go through this, but as we see her right now, she's very much filling this role of she's angry, she's out for revenge, she's relentless, she can't be stopped, and she's got these 7 men in her brain, and she's going out for revenge. So that's a perfect way to kick this whole story off, and that leads us, pan out, and we are now brought over to Talon's. We see Shivers in the gutter, intent on finding.
Well, he starts off a little. Well, he's not in the gutter right at the start. He's kind of coming with a little bit more of this, like, hey, I'm here. I'm going to be a good man. I've heard such good things about this. And this, Charles, Shivers in this he's such an interesting character, especially after all the conversations that we've had about Logan Nine Fingers, where this idea of just the Northman with a bloody past, ready to try to be a good man. Yeah. It's like, we've heard Abercrombie. We've heard this story before. And he takes it in such a totally different direction with Shivers here that we'll get into it a lot more, but just like from the start where you start hearing Shivers telling himself this story about how he's going to be a good man now and turn his life around and leave blood behind him. It's like, Oh, we are in for
Yeah.
it with this one, aren't we, Joe?
That's
what I'm thinking.
Shivers has no idea what kind of story he's in. It's such a shame. But no, it was an interesting move to pick Shivers to insert in this story, but I think it pays off so well and it contrasts with Manza so well, and we're gonna get into that more as the plot progresses. But for right now, Manza recruits Shivers to help her.
Charles.
Yes.
You know where else we'll get into it a little bit more about Shivers is in our upcoming Shivers character profile from the Best Served Cold. That we'll do a few of these. So
I see.
You might hear us say,
yes. We love doing our, Abercrombie's so masterful at writing characters. We've had so much fun going through the First Law series, character by character, in our character series. And we hope to continue that with Best Served Cold. And the two characters that you gotta do are Manza and Shivers. And then we might pepper in a few more along the way. Just because...
Dude, Casca. Yeah. You gotta do Casca.
I think we have enough to
so
do
much
Casca.
To say.
Yeah.
Oh, Charles, I could... I feel like you would have a lot to say about Casca that I'd be very interested in. And... I could probably talk myself too for an hour about Casca. So, dude, he's the character I appreciated even more on the rereads. I just think he's got and I appreciate him right away. I'm just I think Shivers might have been my favorite character the first time I read this, and he's kind of teed up to be at first this like good man, like trying his best type thing, and he's supposed to feel like the protagonist, I think, in that way, and as along for that ride. But now when I reread it, I'm like, dude, Casca is freaking unbelievable. So anyway, and it has like a real arc, which is hard to. It's not as clear cut as Manza, and I think there'd be a lot to get into. But and there's also a lot.
Yeah, and for me, my one piece I'll say about Casca before we get back to the plot. It's a two-parter after all. We have time to go astray. Is that with Casca? I can't tell you how many like TV shows and books I read where they have like, and this is the whimsical rogue character, and you just want to roll your eyes and be like, oh my god, kill me now. This character is like so embarrassing. Like they're just saying things that like a clever roguish person would say, and that's like the extent of their character. With Casca, he's just as grandiose as those characters, but then we weave in these more, and we just weave in these moments of character work that are very surprising and greatly appreciated in the reread. So I'm happy to get into those as we go. But the first thing we got to do is get through this whole Shiver Manza's meet cute situation, but not really.
Meet cute is generous for... I think it's funny to call it that, Charles. And it's generous for these two because in just clear Abercrombie fashion, there's not really anything cute about their interaction. It's just that Manza sees a killer. She needs a killer. You're hired.
Right. It's one of Manza's gifts that she can just kind of identify the needs of other people and leverage those in negotiations and convince people to do things. And she sees the potential in Shivers right away, even though he's pretty much a beggar at this point. She recognizes him as someone that she could use, and that's how Manza recruits Shivers. They go on to meet Sajam, who then loans them the assistance of Friendly, and Friendly joins the fray.
Thoughts on Friendly, Charles?
I'm entertained by Friendly. I think he's fun. Would I do a whole character series episode dedicated to him? No. But do I get a kick out of him when he's talking? Yes.
I love his relationship with Casca. We'll get into that more. I think that's where Friendly really starts to shine, is when we start seeing him with Casca, where they kind of each have something that the other one lacks. There's a great quote from Casca at one point about that we won't get into now. But Friendly's interesting. He sees things through such a detached lens that sometimes he does have these moments, I think, where he just like sees things for what they are because he's not trying to tell himself a story about it. I think that's so much of what this book is about, is that people tell themselves stories about who they are. And I think that to bring us back here, Charles, to the Manza and Shivers interaction that's going on around this time is there's this great quote about kind of like telling yourself stories and giving yourself excuses and things like that, where Manza's recruiting him, that I'd love to read.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah. So Manza says, "So you're one of them, eh?" And Shivers says, "One of what?" "One of those men that like reasons, that need excuses. You're a dangerous crowd, you lot. Hard to predict." She shrugged. "But if it helps, he killed my brother." That's to justify why she's hiring Shivers to kill someone. And then we get the Shivers prose where Shivers is like thinking about how he had a brother who was killed by none other than Logan the Bloody Nine Fingers.
Right.
And there's a line in the prose, "He killed my brother. Felt as if he would have said no to anything else. But maybe he just needed the money." And he takes it. He takes the job. He takes the money. And we've got a lot of buildup of Shivers kind of in the gutter and in this rough situation and trying really hard to be a good man, and it's not paying off. But this is where we start moving toward this Shivers arc of like mirroring some of those Logan Nine Fingers type things about, well, you know, anything else I wouldn't have done it, but it's a brother revenge story, and that's so important to me, Shivers. And it's easy to buy in because we know, especially if we've read the First Law trilogy, which you and I have, then we're like, yes, Shivers, that was Shivers' arc in the original trilogy in so many ways, was trying to deal with the fact that Logan killed his brother. And the weird thing is that Shivers had walked away from the chance for vengeance multiple times already with Logan. So you see him walking back toward it. And this line of, "but maybe he just needed the money," is like, Shivers, are we really buying in that you're so sold on the idea of trying to help someone else with their revenge on someone's brother when you've already turned away the opportunity to get revenge for your own brother with Logan? So I think that's why it's easy to buy in, and I bought in on my first read for sure on this. And then later I was looking at this line, I was like, I think he just needed the money. Because he, right?
Yeah, he was tired of being broke, of course. And we know from the end of this book, there's a reveal that Shivers hated his brother, and that his brother was never nice to him and was abusive and all that. Yes. And that is a fun twist as well that parallels Manza's story.
Fun's interesting. I get what you're saying though, Charles.
I mean, this for Abercrombie, it's fun. This is how Abercrombie has fun. Okay, he twists.
This is how he has fun. That's well said, Charles.
When he's writing these stories, this is how Abercrombie has fun. He makes the brother that was the whole inciting incident for him to join be a horrible, abusive person, and so it just kind of reveals Shivers like. Because Shivers at the end of this just drops all pretense and is brutally honest with himself and doesn't care anymore. So he's like, yeah, he kind of sucked. And you pushing back on him?
I think that's complicated. I think it's complicated whether Shivers is being honest with himself or not by the end of it. But let's save that for our wonderful Shivers character profile that's coming up later. It's complicated. I think it's a conversation to be had.
Right.
I'm not saying it's not true.
Anyway, we get back to the plot. Okay, we were paralleling Shivers' brother with Manza's, and that's why they get all buddy-buddy. It's an interesting idea that unravels as this book goes on, but it's kind of fun to be like, oh yeah, because that whole original trilogy with Shivers was about vengeance for his brother and working with Logan Nine Fingers, and he was trying to be a better man. You know, he was trying to walk away from all the blood and
like the Dogman told him to.
And that's, you know, what we think of Shivers at this point. And that brings us to our first, like, kill on the list, Kill Bill style. Yeah. The first list we have Gaba.
And Gaba's an interesting one to start with because he just seems like a brutish thug in a lot of ways. And I think that Abercrombie's very deliberate it seems, with the order of the people he gives you. And the first thing he wants you to see is a person who I think he, if I'm remembering correctly, talked about wanting to sexually assault Monza when they were in the process of throwing her out the window. So if you're remembering that, which it's hard to track what all 7 of those people were doing that you just met, but I do think that Gaba, was talking about wanting to sexually assault her. So you're thinking this is a vile person in a lot of ways, and you're a lot easier down the road, or it's a lot easier to go down the road of like, this guy deserves it and not feel terribly bad. But there is a little bit of a feeling of something's off when Monza is just super underwhelmed by the kill at the end of it.
But also, I'm talking about these peaks of violence, and this is another one where it goes heavy into the description. Monza's breaking this guy's body apart with a hammer, piece by piece, little piece by little piece, until she eventually, finally, just like unrelentingly crushes him with a hammer repeatedly till he dies. And it's one of the many shocking deaths in this book, and it comes back to this revenge. It's almost like Abercrombie wants you to want that moment, right? It was like, oh, this is a victory for Monza. Like, this is a horrible person. They killed her brother. She's getting revenge, and then you end up just feeling a little sick afterwards, and a bit underwhelmed, and you're dealing with okay, this was the victory I wanted, but why do I feel uncomfortable in these moments? And everyone in the room is kind of uncomfortable at what just happened. They're all just like, whoa, that was a bit much. And it's just a beautiful environment that Abercrombie was able to create in this scene.
Well said, Charles. Yeah, I think that's an important piece that we don't want to miss out on. Is I do believe that Abercrombie is intentional about making the scene gross and making the scene something that makes the reader feel somewhat disgusted. And I appreciate you pointing that out, because we want to almost follow Monza's journey with it, where Monza thinks this is what she wants so badly. It's what she, quote unquote, should want, right? You just killed my brother. He was my everything. Yeah. And now I want to kill you for it, right? Isn't that something I'm supposed to want after this happens? Aren't I the Serpent of Talons who's supposed to be brutal? And she's playing this role and doing all this stuff. And by the end of it, she's just like, what the hell was that? But it's just a little bit of a feeling right now for her and for us as readers, I think, too.
Right. And I believe Shivers is taking the point of like, you got your revenge. How does it feel? Like, like he's got it all figured out and she doesn't, and which we know that position flip-flops constantly throughout this book. But it's, again, this conversation around revenge and vengeance and blood, getting more blood and all of this, and it's the start of it. This is a pretty familiar theme of like is the pursuit of revenge, and as we get further down the list on our way to Orso, it becomes a lot more complicated and interesting. So that's Gaba first off the list. A nice way to kick us off with a bludgeon death.
Oof. Well, we're used to them with Glokta. Well, maybe not deaths usually with him, but we're used to some of these brutal scenes with Glokta in the original trilogy. So
right. He did something very similar. He would chop off the dude's fingertips, and then it was going down his hand, and that was reminiscent of that for certain.
Right.
And so after our first name is off the list, we're trying to go on and kill Malthus the banker. But before we can do that, we need to recruit someone, a master poisoner by the name of Castor Morvier and his apprentice Day. Dylan, what are we thinking about Castor Morvier?
Castor Morvier is one of, in my reading experiences, the most easy to hate characters I've ever read. I mean, at least as point of view, right? So take it out of the clear villain characters that are like Dark Lords that of course they're just awful people, but for a more regular and point of view character. I mean, point of view characters, I feel like as readers, we're naturally inclined toward wanting to like them when we get into their perspective and hear how they think about themselves, especially when they think about themselves as being a decent person and trying their best. Mm-hmm. And Morvier does think about himself not just as being a decent person, but being an incredible person. Just what, and this is... It's so interesting because I think about comparing Morvier to Casca is a big thing that I've wanted to do because they both have these narcissistic type tendencies, I would say. Morvier way more than Casca, for sure.
Yeah.
But Casca loves blowing himself up and talking about how amazing he is and all the incredible things he's done. And we eat it all up, just like all the characters do around him. He's just got this charisma in the way that he does it. And Morvier is kind of doing the same thing, right? He thinks of himself as this unbelievable master poisoner in all of these ways. He tells himself that story too. And I think, and I imagine, Charles, I imagine you're not a big Morvier fanboy over there. I imagine you had something of a similar reaction.
I find him highly entertaining, but I'm not a fanboy. I think he's a character that's fun. It's played up. It's it's a fun role. This idea of a poisoner. It's a bit more. It gets a little silly sometimes with Morvier, and I think that's really funny. But yeah, he's not likable by any means.
Right, and I guess to bring it back, when I say a character that is very easy to hate, I mean as a person rather than as a. I actually think the Morvier portrayal is something that I was also very entertained and I guess intrigued by, because I see him as in a lot of ways this subversion of these roguish characters I love so much. Like both him and Casca have these roguish qualities, and you get to see Abercrombie, again, I'll use the word deliberate. Like he deliberately wants you to see Morvier as this like, why are you doing all this stuff? There's that moment where they like have to get entry into a city, and Morvier is like, I'm going to be so clever. I'm going to tell this guard. They're like, what? This bored guard is like, what's your business in the city? And Morvier is like, murder. And it's supposed to be like in Morvier's head. It's like this, oh, look how clever I am. Like I can say murder and we'll still get in anyway. And it's like, dude, you just made everything harder for everyone around you. And you did it just so you could look clever. And I feel like in a lot of ways that's a subversion of this, like, I'm cleverer than everyone master plan type. Like one of my favorite characters ever is Locke Lamora from The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch.
From the what?
Oh, God, Charles. It's like you want people to get on you about that. So he's kind of this like roguish mastermind character. And he's always saying clever things, all this kind of stuff. And I feel like Morvier is almost like Abercrombie looking at characters like that. And it's like, you're being clever at the cost of your own well-being and other people's well-being too, and making everything harder for yourself by this need to be clever. And it's just that makes him such an intriguing character. But I think the reason that he's easy to hate while Casca's easy to love, to bring it back to that point, because it's really interesting to me as two roguish types, is I think Morvier's lack of self-awareness. And Abercrombie, when Abercrombie writes a character that lacks self-awareness, the prose just brutally taunts them, right? Like he kind of did this with Jezal in the first Law trilogy. We point out some of these like the adverbs, like Jezal became dimly aware of this, and it's like Abercrombie's
brutally
making fun of
taunting prose is a brilliant, it's a brilliant
Yeah.
observation, Dylan. It's so true.
With Morvier, it's like it's very similar. So I think that lack of self-awareness is what makes him so easy to hate, because it's like it's okay to do things wrong and blow yourself up and all this kind of stuff, but you actually aren't all those things,
Right.
you aren't the nicest, most generous person ever.
Right.
So that's probably more Veer talk than you're maybe hoping for or expecting. But he's, I don't know. He's not like any other character. I feel like because it's like Casca, you could be like he's kind of like Jack Sparrow in some ways, different in other ways. But you see that Veer, it's like, who's he like besides kind of a subversion of these mastermind types and
Right. And these like science types. He's I think another part of what makes him so unlikable is that like his just blatant disregard for like humanity and for other people as well. Like he immediately poisons everyone in the room when they try and meet him. He immediately paralyzes all of them. He's like, "Oh, you can't be too careful," and everyone's like, "Well, we all instantly hate you now."
hate you. Well, yes.
I'm trying
agree.
to channel Stephen Pacey's performance.
I love when you do that, Charles.
He's very like
Your voices are great.
Yes, well, it's from hours of listening to Pacey. So his portrayals, the creative direction he chooses to take Veer is almost like a snivelly kind of, "Oh, I'm an intelligent man. Like he's like, I will poison everyone with the most perfect poison." You're like, okay, that's cool. So already people don't like him. And you can easily understand why when one of the first things he does is prove that he's a not trustworthy man by paralyzing all of them. So that's Castor Veer. And I think the more we learn about him... Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. I think another bit is that it's like Joe Abercrombie thinking to himself, what kind of person becomes a poisoner for their career? Yeah. Not a great person, probably. So I think that's part of what's going on. I won't go into detail about that now. But
yeah, that's well said. That's well said. And I love all the poison shenanigans that get on in this book. This book, more than First Law, reads to me just like a book that's willing to be like fun for fun's sake. Like sometimes the violence is a bit gratuitous just because it's fun sometimes to have violence, and like these crazy shenanigans they get into with poison, some of the dialogue from Casca, you feel he's like hamming it up a little bit sometimes just for the pure purpose of entertainment. And I appreciate that about Best Served Cold. I feel like Best Served Cold as a standalone serves to entertain just as much as it serves to subvert the genre or give us great characters like the First Law trilogy did. He is still trying to make points and have a thesis and all this, but he's also just willing to sit back and have fun as well. And that's how this book stands out to me in the library of Abercrombie that I've read.
Right. I would agree with that, Charles. And I was reading, there's this little interview at the end of my paperback that they asked Abercrombie about some of his inspiration for it and that kind of stuff. And I think he used the word thriller to describe Best Served Cold, which was interesting to me. I don't think I'd read it before the last few days. And I'd read Best Served Cold a few times. I'd never really thought of it as a thriller, but when I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, like I guess I could see that. I guess a thriller I think is a little more nonstop and a little less of the time to focus on the characters and the dialogue, which is something I adore about Abercrombie's work. It's why we spend so much time talking about him, and we talk about him as one of our clear favorite authors.
Right.
But yeah, I guess by Abercrombie standards, this was like boom, 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 boom. Like we're not going to spend time and just but like dialogue and engage with characters, even though there's still a ton of that in this book. So it finds that balance of still having that Abercrombie charm while the plot is freaking moving.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, the plot moves fast and there's a lot it has to get through. So to try and channel that energy, we'll keep this going. We're gonna keep going here. We got Valentin Bach here, right? We're trying to poison one of their bankers, Malthus, and the way that Morvir decides he's going to execute on this is to
Oh
poison
my God.
the entire bank. He's like, well, you can't just figure out which one he's going to touch, so you have to get all of them. It's the only way you can be sure. And what's his caution first always? You know,
Yes,
that's
gosh.
his.
And then Day in the Stephen Pacey audiobook narrations, caution first, always. It's
Yeah.
like she's got this really high pitched.
She parrots him. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that she's always eating something too. I can
That's fun,
appreciate
too.
that. Yeah, but anyway,
Bad idea around Castor Morvir
Yeah.
to always be eating something, but
yeah, just to
Yeah.
be so like uninspiringly, just like dumbly eating something in the background of a meeting constantly, it's kind of funny. It's like, oh, she won't stop chewing. It's like annoying, but it's an interesting little character thing for Day. But I just love this bank scene so much, and they had this whole heist thing to get in, and he like was dripping acid on the rope, which
Oh my
almost
God.
broke, and he almost died. Like all these, he was making
was a
fun of
mess.
Shivers, that whole thing as well, and a bunch of different dynamics going on there, but it's more for the purpose of entertainment than plot. So we'll get to the juicy bits, which is where they poison literally every ledger in the bank, right? And
God.
it causes a stampede, and it kills
Yes.
tons of people, and Manza is not happy.
yeah, and that's something that is very likable, or at least as these really morally gray characters go in Abercrombie's work. That's something likable about Manza, that she really despises that Morvir let all this collateral damage happen. She is pissed at him, and she just really, you can tell she's trying to keep up this guard of like, I have to be hard, I have to be the Serpent of Talons, all this kind of stuff. And she's making all these justifications as to why she's mad about it. It's like, oh no, like more stuff is bringing more attention and things like that. Like more kills is bringing more attention. But she's just pissed because I think she cares about the people. And Morvir, blatant disregard for the people in this bank.
Absolutely, and he's actually, even speaking so true to his character, he's kind of surprised at
Yeah.
Manza's reaction. He's like, what are you talking about? You hired me to kill this guy, and I just did it, and no one knows it's us, and no one can tell it was him, and like, it was brilliant. It's what you wanted. And aren't you the infamous, like, you know, Butcher of Talons?
Serpent, yeah. Serpent? Yeah. Butcher of Capril, Serpent
Butcher
of
of
Talons.
Capril, thank you. I couldn't
Yeah.
get the Witcher out of my head. The Butcher of Blaviken. which is
Yeah. Was I saying Snake of Talons?
Yeah, you were.
It's in my head. Serpent
Yeah,
of Talons, Butcher of Capril, I think is
that sounds right. So it's like,
terminology.
given your reputation, you'd think you'd be cool with this. And then we know through flashbacks as this book goes on that her hand was forced by Benna the entire time.
Over and over again.
So she
Yeah.
never even really felt that way. She was almost kind of backing up Benna's decisions, which is such a great reveal. Like, I'm not usually a
Yes.
huge, like, let's flashback and force why you should be empathetic towards this character over, and I'm like, can't we just get that in the story? But these moments were fun because it twists are how we remember Benna. You know, it's like, oh, Benna was so in it. He wasn't a fighter, and he got stabbed and killed. It was so unfair, you know.
Yeah.
And then you're like,
Poor
oh,
Benna.
actually,
And he's charming.
Yeah, he's charming.
He's
He's
so
buying her
charming.
nice
That's part of it.
stuff,
Yeah.
and Manza loves him. So it's like, okay, well, poor Benna. You know, he's too innocent for this world. You know, he was too soft.
But Charles, but Casca is constantly telling us throughout the story. It's not even like a reveal if you listen to Casca. The whole story, Casca is like, oh no, like your brother is an awful dude. And it's one of these ways in which Abercrombie, I think, uses his characters so well, where it's like, you can't trust anything that Casca says. Casca says whatever he wants to get the things that he is looking to get out of this conversation. But it's actually, if you focus on Casca's dialogue, there's a ton of truth that he's always dropping. And one of them is he's always saying just how bad a person Benna was. So it's an interesting one. You feel like maybe he's like in love with Manza, and there's all these there's hints, and it's almost like pretty explicitly said a few times before it is explicitly said that her and her brother were lovers, and you get the sense maybe Casca is super jealous of her brother and all that. But he was dropping truths.
Yeah, and he's also, Casca's just as unsavory as the rest, but it's
in his own way, but
it is in a way. But
we'll get into
We'll
it.
get into it, but that's what's been led up. Everyone tells him that he can't be trusted and that he's betrayed everybody and all those kinds of things. But it's in the ways he chooses to do it or not do it that are interesting. But we can get into that later because another fun character from the first Law trilogy enters the fray, and that's Shiloh Vitari and Arlo's lover, Carla Den Eider. We find out what has become of Carla, yes.
I think back in around the bank situation, Monza and Shivers get together for the first time, right?
Yes, they do get together.
Yeah. So
we get I think it's the way
Joe
Abercrombie
Abercrombie sex
falls.
scene.
Yeah, we get a great.
Yeah, that great, and it's all Abercrombie sex scenes just are so honest. I think
and they're so awkward and painful too. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, it's true to it's again kind of like the Pharaoh and Logan Nine Fingers one. This one's not that awkward, but it just feels like, I don't know, they're both looking for, basically Monza's looking for a surrogate for Benna just to take his place. She's even murmuring Benna's name under her breath, like in her sleep and stuff like that, or as she's waking up. And Shivers is, unbeknownst to Shivers is having trouble connecting those dots. But Shivers barely knows her, and they're just kind of like, okay, well, it's just the two of us here. You just got a haircut recently. That's Monza. Shivers like, you're looking okay. You're looking pretty good. And Shivers thinks that about Monza, and then they have sex. But it's not that there's this deep chemistry between them. They have some banter and something going. But I don't know. It's just, this happens sometimes between two folks who are attracted to each other. So it's not going to be this epic love moment that we get in some other stories. It's
right.
just
and then
what it is.
Morvier falls through the window or through the ceiling or something and is personally offended. it's like that's
his default state is personally offended.
It's like he's the one that barged in. I don't know, but it was funny of all the people to witness
the last person you want to see.
Yeah, he would be the most offended of them all. So that is hilarious. So that true is funny. And then we finally get to Vitari and Carla Den Eider.
Yes.
We get some flashbacks or some reminiscing of the first Law trilogy here with these characters. They have gone in new directions. Yeah, Vitari is not a practical anymore. Carla Den Eider is not the head of the Guild of Spicers anymore.
Nope.
They are in very different roles, and it's interesting to see them. And Carla's keeps referring to the cripple and things like that, which is very fun. It reminds me of when I was thinking of this when I was reading this, where Carla's like, the cripple will kill me. It's like when Netflix did the Marvel shows, but they couldn't say the Incredible Hulk for copyright reasons. And they were like, oh, the Green Man and the guy with the shield were going to come out here.
Yeah.
And, it's like, oh, it's the cripple. It's this extended universe thing going on that I thought was really funny, because we know now the way that First Law played out. Glock is basically controlling the Union on behalf of Baez, so he's incredibly powerful, and Carla's in fear of him now and basically doing what he says, which has come a long way from before they are hanged.
Yeah, we've definitely come a long way. And Vitari and Carla, Vitari was choking out Carlotte maybe the last time they saw each other, so that's a tough reunion, and it's very interesting. You get these Easter egg moments by reading. The standalones do standalone, right?
Oh, you said
you
it.
could just read this. I just couldn't think of a better way to say it. They tell a complete story in themselves, but you get these Easter eggs by having read earlier, and you do get those moments. As a funny comparison to the like Marvel TV shows where they can't use the name. Of course, Abercrombie could use the name, but I don't think he says the word Glocta at any point, and I guess that's part of him trying to say, "Hey, I know you love Glocta, but this story is not about him. He's in the world. He's still doing stuff, but like, don't get caught up on this, and you're not going to see him in this story." I think is part of what he was trying to say. Like, this isn't going to be about Glocta. We know you might want it to be.
Yep, I wouldn't mind seeing Glocta. We did get to see one of the characters, which we'll get into later, but we're not quite there yet. I just wanted to tease that one because I love that scene. I love so that character, which you all know, but we won't say because it's fun not to say it. So we'll talk about him later. But for right now, they're cooking up this plan. They've enlisted Carla Den Eider to give them control over the entertainment at Cardotti's House of Leisure, which great name, by the way, Cardotti's.
Yeah, leisure. And leisure,
Yeah, that's Cardotti's House of Leisure. I love it. And they, of all people, Casca is in charge of hiring the entertainment. And we know what kind of people Casca finds entertaining.
Well, I think he was well equipped because they needed a band of folks who could also wield weapons, and I trust Casca to do that. Can we also talk about Casca, the Casca introduction, that we just get this point of view chapter from Casca where we talked about Shivers being in the gutter. Casca's in the gutter too. And, we know famed soldier of fortune, Nicomo Casca, has had some really amazing experiences in his life, or at least impressive experiences in his life. And he's just reached a point at the beginning of this story where he's just down on his luck. Might be generous to call it luck because it's been all the drinking and not taking control of his own life and pursuing things that are worthwhile to him. He's just lost. And then Monza, the person who betrayed him, comes out of nowhere and asks him to help. And now he's helping with this entertainment hiring. And I don't know. It's up to interpretation how good a job he did. I guess they got the job done.
It probably would have gone over much better, but you can't predict, Friendly's behavior in those scenes. But I do love Casca playing into the role so well and hiring the band, and the band sounds terrible, but he's like, "Oh, sweet, sweet music. You guys are really sensitive souls." And they're like, okay.
No regard for the truth.
None. He's just like willing these performers into existence, and then he's got the fire breather, and Shivers is like, "That dude's gonna kill all of us." He's like, "Yeah, he's perfect for the role. Very entertaining." And he gets into all of it. They hire another Northman to recreate the battle of Logan versus the Feared, which is hilarious. And Shivers plays the role of Logan, which is very funny as well. That was just kind of silly.
Well, I actually don't think it's just silly. Like, I think of that as almost this, dare I say, like capital L literature type moment for me, where it's like, Shivers is cast in the Logan role in this Best Served Cold story for me. He's cast in the role of the Northman telling himself a story about how he's going to try to be a good man. So in classic Abercrombie fashion, I think there's an awareness of the idea that, this is the Logan of this story, so why don't we just dress him up like Logan and have him play out that whole scene with the Feared that you love so much. It almost reminds me of in the original First Law trilogy where he gets Baez all dressed up in the wizard garb and things like that, because it's like, is this what you want to see? Like, I know what you want to see. And I don't know. I think that was intentional. Maybe I'm looking too much into it. And you've critiqued me for that in the past on episodes, but that's how I think about this moment is he's cast in the role it's like a meta moment for me.
Yeah, it's absolutely a meta moment, and of all peoples, that Schiffer has a complicated past with Logan is one of them, and being forced to embrace that by playing him in a play is a delightful little twist there by Abercrombie, and the fact that turned into another revenge story is funny as well. But I guess we're at that moment, right?
Well,
because
yeah,
where Kadaris turns upside down. But I guess not actually. Right before that, the thing we teased before. Who Monza has this whole plan. She's gonna dress up like one of the entertainers and get a private room with what's his face there, the son, and she was going to.
Is that Ario?
Yes, Ario, I believe. Ario or Foscar, so. One of them, and
I'll double check, but yeah.
Anyway, so who shows up? But the character that can't help but screw things up or not understand his role in all of this, and that is Giselle Dan Luther. He finds himself in these really critical situations. Always clueless though. He's like so unbelievably clueless at every moment, yet he's in these quintessentially important moments in the story, and it's such a delightful character balance. So when you see him, you're like, oh my god, the character they pulled off the A tier list, from First Law, and chose to bring into the story. Again, like a Marvel movie, it's like, okay, like we might have, Spider-Man might swing in to this movie for 5 minutes and leave to, keep the fans and the extended universe going. That's what we're getting with Giselle right now. It's like, ooh, they got Giselle for this. That's kind of spicy.
Like the cameo. It's like Robert Downey Jr. appears just for a moment in Spider-Man, and you're like, ooh. So exactly. It's like, oh, look, I know he's not going to be in the whole thing, but it's cool seeing him.
It's cool that they got him, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, okay, there's a moment leading up to that where Vitari comments on the fact that Giselle is coming to actually try to make peace and help out, which is so like Giselle going about his life trying to just be a good king. But she says, like, no one in Styria is taking it seriously. And it's like a foggy city is part of it too. And she says, the only man who's come here hoping for anything but fog is his august majesty, but they say he's got a talent for self-deception. Oh, burned. A talent for self-deception. Yeah. So he's in there. Yeah, he's in this scene. He gets a scene with Monza, Charles.
Yeah, it's a fun scene because he's like, I've done this before, and she's like, what the heck am I supposed to do right now? Because am I supposed to play this out or what? Like, if I don't go through with it, then I'll get discovered. If I do go through with it, then I'll have to go through with it, which is also horrible. And it's this fun scenario where you're like, what is she going to do?
Fun
and like, again, this is how Abercrombie has fun, okay? It's fun.
It's not the first word that comes to my mind. Giselle keeps ending up in these situations with, like, trying to have sex with someone who just is not on the same page with him at all about what the goal of the interaction is with him. This one's not like, I don't know, it's really almost like sickening, and I think intentionally so, in the First Law trilogy when he has that moment with Therese. This one's not crazy. Like that, but it's like it's like this. Just I feel for Giselle because he's just consistently stuck in his self-deception, and it's not even self-deception in this case. Like if he knew what was going on, he would not go through with it. Same with Therese, but he is so clueless that he's
his only self-deception is that he would think that someone like Therese would all of a sudden love him now, and it's like, oh, she does love me, and I believe that right now, and it's finally, and it's like that is self-deception, but it's his also just his pure cluelessness, and that's where he is right now. And Manza's solution to the whole thing is to get high, basically, and encourage the king of the Union, Giselle Don Luther, to partake in the drug use. And he's like, oh, I've never done this before. And she's like, just breathe. And she somehow manages to get out of there unscathed. So that was a fun little moment with Giselle that I enjoyed the first time, I enjoyed the second time, and it leads us right into the craziness that is the sheer calamity of that erupts at Cardati's House of Leisure.
Yeah, and I want to say that there are a couple moments I want to mention for the Giselle bit. One is that she tells him when he is in a daze, so we don't know how much of this he took in or didn't take in. Manza told him, your wife likes women.
Yes.
And that's an interesting
and he acted
thing that happened,
shocked
he
at
walked
the time,
out.
but did he remember? Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know that at this point. So that's an interesting moment for, I think, First Law fans looking for like Giselle to wake up a little bit to his situation.
Right.
Is that like maybe Therese? I mean, saying that someone likes women doesn't mean that they don't like men, but I think that's what Manza was trying to imply there. And there's also a moment with Giselle where he says something, I'm not finding the quote at the moment, but it's like, I've always had a thing for, oh, there it is. I mean, no disrespect, but one of you will be more than adequate, and I have always had a weakness for dark hair.
Oh.
Which,
he's
thinking about Artie.
Yeah.
He's thinking about Artie. So I just want to say that for our, I think most people listening to this are probably folks who've read the whole First Law trilogy up to this and the Giselle stuff. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that's, I guess, what you would call an Easter egg.
Yeah.
It
hurts me.
Yeah.
Poor Giselle.
Yeah, poor Giselle. He still has a thing for Artie, but he can't have her. It just didn't work out that way. And yeah, it's brutal. And you get to, it's so transparent, and that's in that moment. And all of us that remember from First Law, what happens with Giselle, it's like, oh, of course he would have a thing for dark-haired women, and it's just like
poor Giselle.
Poor Giselle.
Living in the past.
Well, what else has he got? I'm sure his life stinks.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone around him hates him and thinks very lowly of him. And he's the king, which is the
Giselle. It hurts.
Yeah. But you can go back and listen to our Giselle character profile and get all into the weeds with exactly how tragic his character arc is, and you may come away from that feeling a bit more sympathetic towards Giselle. If you read him and just found him unlikable and dismissed him, you might get a second chance after listening to that episode. So definitely go check that out. He is as tragic as he is delusional, so you gotta check that out.
Somehow that was savage. I think Batari would have been proud. That was quite a line.
I was channeling
a
Batari
talent
for
one. You really were. All right, well, Charles, I will give you a second chance to actually move the plot forward here. I assume you're moving toward the friendly's reaction to insulting his dice.
It's like, my dice are loaded, or whatever he said. It was like,
yeah, I think that was it. And then you get a cleaver to the head or face or whatever.
Yeah, it was to the face. Yeah.
Say what you want about Friendly himself, but when it comes to numbers and dice, you don't mess with Friendly.
Yeah, and this was a side of Friendly's character that we are seeing for the first time, because he's always been very kind of slow but deliberate in his speech and his actions, and he's also been very much like disassociated from everything that was happening. He's just kind of there because his boss wanted him to be there, and he's got no stake in any of this. He doesn't have really much of a relationship with anybody here. And this is the first rise we get out of him, and the result is a brutal act of swift and deadly violence, of a cleaver to the face. And yeah, that kicks off a whole series of violence. But it's just interesting. It's like, yeah, you insult him, his intelligence, his size, whatever, and then you insult his dice, which he's considered dice and numbers to be and routine to be the most holy of things. Yeah. And you desecrate that, and he's coming for you. So that was a pretty amazing scene. Like, of all the things to cause this plan to go haywire, Friendly losing it over a pair of dice, an accusation over dice, is hilarious. And then of course we get all of the performers attacking. You get the band like hitting people with the lutes, and you get the fire breather burning the place down, and everyone's
Greylock
panicking.
trying to kill Shivers.
Yes,
for that
so
sweet
good.
vengeance of his younger brother in Ophrith, which too was, if I remember correctly, Ophrith was
Dogman.
Where the Dogman
he was praised for not killing people.
Exactly.
He only killed two people.
Classic. Yeah. It's classic Abercrombie I mean, speak of Easter eggs. Was it that little kid almost that the Dogman was like, oh, like, I hate that this is a thing where we're going to have to kill this guy. It's so bad. And he's like pissed at himself when he probably, they got killed. But if the Dogman didn't handle it so well, so many more would have gotten killed. And the Dogman's beating himself up for it. So you get these Easter egg moments too here where it's like I think that, oh God, what's the line from the first Lost Trilogy? It's like the seeds of the past bear fruit in the present.
Right.
It's like that's always happening as the First Law world keeps moving.
Blood only gets more blood.
It's like, yes. And it's like, okay, now Greylock, like that younger brother had an older brother. Like that was one of two people who got killed when hundreds could have or whatever. They have relatives. And now the guy's coming for Shivers, and Shivers has this very interesting moment where he's like, he basically speculates that the guy can't tell a good man from a bad, and he's like, well, I guess I'll try to kill him too. And it's like, Shivers, if you're in touch with the part of you that wants to be a good person right now, maybe you wouldn't try. I know this is self-defense, but maybe you wouldn't try to kill him. So it's just an interesting moment of like, can't tell a good man from a bad man. What's wrong with this guy? Guess I'll kill him. Yes, okay, Shivers.
Right. And what I also love about that moment is this whole book's about revenge, right? And we're all in these characters' heads, and they're agonizing over the decisions to execute revenge or not. And it's this very serious thing. And then you get this moment where they're like play fighting, and this guy's like, I will have revenge on my brother, and you're like, what? And when it hits you out of nowhere, it sounds so stupid and so silly and almost funny, but to that character, yes, deadly serious. And he, to the point where he's like, you were there, so I reckon you're good enough. You know, it wasn't even like the Dogman, which I guess would be his real vengeance achieved would be killing him. Like, Shivers wasn't even part of that. I mean, he may have been at the camp while that was going on. Yeah, but he certainly had no part in it. And so it's like, I will get my revenge, like in the middle of the fight. And Shivers is like, what? It kind of speaks to like the pointlessness of it all. Yes. It's so funny to get it out of context. It's like, this is what Manza's doing to other people in the world. And it's...
Yes, that's true, Charles. And part of it, and it's so well said, it's a great point, because it does have that weird jarring, like, what? Why are you trying to kill Shivers? But meanwhile, Shivers is on this giant path for revenge that he's justifying to himself is because he wants to help someone else get vengeance for someone else's brother? So it's like, Shivers' justification is just as, if not more, like, what? What are you talking about? So, you get this moment, like you said, Charles, that it's brought attention to how silly that actually is, that you're trying to kill people for reasons.
Right. The narrative that drives you to vengeance is so silly and, in many cases, meaningless. And the narratives that drive all of these characters end up being borderline meaningless until the end. So,
well... And Charles, you say the story is about revenge, and the story is and vengeance and things like that. And the story is about that in a lot of ways. But this will probably be a tease because I don't think I'll say what it is in this part one. But I would make the case after this read that the story is not quite most about revenge from a like character perspective. It's about something else that we'll get into probably in part 2. But
Ooh, nice
yeah,
tease.
It's so hard for me not to say it. but I'm trying to do. Charles, you're always doing the awesome teases and stuff. You got that like good brain for it. So I just can't help vomiting all my thoughts up immediately. So I'm working on it, Charles. We're like over 100 episodes in here. I've learned a little bit.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. And I mean, we're at a point now. Do we get into Viscerine or do we wrap it up? How are we feeling at this time? A lot happens in Viscerine. We do have a little bit of time. Do we want to get into Shiver's whole eye situation right now? I feel like that's such a
that's
such a conversation.
Attention.
Yeah, it's going to need its own attention. So anyway, Manza's crew rides to Viscerine and goes to the safe house, and I think that's maybe a great place.
Oh, and can we say the whole thing burns down, basically? That the Kurdati stuff...
Yes, yeah. Well, let's wrap up Kurdatis. I mean, that place burns to the ground. Manza does get her vengeance. And
we get a decompressing moment after where it's like Manza and Shiver. Shiver saves her life, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes,
right?
Yes. He throws her out the window.
And she kills... yes, and she does kill Ario.
Yes.
As well. And then... we get Shiver saving her life, and while that's all happening, we get the rest of the crew, the merry band, our fellowship here, speculating on what to do, assuming that Manza very well might be dead.
Yeah.
And Morvir is suggesting, like, okay, yeah, like we just got to figure out how to maximize the amount of money we walk away from here, and forget about her and all this kind of stuff. And I think she basically like walks in on him talking about that.
Yeah. We were just deciding what to do here, and Morvir was just figuring out how to split up the funds. You know, Casca was getting into all that.
Casca, I think, you're right about that.
Casca out,
and that's an interesting.
Morvir.
It's just such an interesting relationship between Casca and Morvir too, Charles.
Yeah, it's like a competition for attention.
But it's no contest.
Yeah, no one.
Everyone's
likes
paying attention. And that's the thing is, everyone does actually. I don't know if "like" is the right word, but everyone's drawn to Casca. Everyone is entertained by Casca, and when he's talking, people are listening, even if they think he's full of crap. And I think that what Morvir throughout the story is so nothing bothers him more than the attention that Casca is getting. And I think he can't stand it because he basically sees Casca as doing all the kind of things that Morvir is doing, but people like him for it, and everyone hates Morvir for it. Yeah. It's like blowing yourself up and making everything into a big story and a big show. It's like that's what Morvir does, but he does it in such an unlikable and narcissistic feeling and unself-aware way, while Casca's the first one to sort of like poke fun and be self-aware of his own shtick and that kind of stuff, and people gravitate toward Casca for that. But Morvir thinks of himself kind of the way that other people interact with Casca.
Yeah,
like he thinks
Morvir
he should be a
person to have that kind of attention drawn to him and that kind of respect, and he resents all the attention that Casca's getting.
Yeah,
and I think it's interesting to extend that as like, well, that's because they're both roguish types in a lot of ways. So
yes,
Morvir's like, I'm doing the same thing over here. Why aren't they liking me? And it's like, well, what you're saying is kind of like mean and heartless, and the things you do are like disconnected from humanity. Where at least Casca's not afraid to butter people up.
I got it, Charles. Casca under promises and over delivers.
Yeah.
And Morvir over promises and under delivers. And they might be at about the same level of competence, if we're being right. Like Morvir, it's hard to get a grasp of where he's at because he's like, I'm the best poisoner ever, blah, blah, blah. But I think he's good at what he does. Like, he's proficient. He's not as good as he thinks he is. But he'll tell everyone how amazing he is all the time. But Casca is self-deprecating. Yes, he'll say, I'm famed soldier of fortune, blah, 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 blah. But he's like, oh, yeah, no, I betray anyone if they give me money. Like, of course, I prioritize money, loyalties for the birds and those kind of things. He wouldn't say for the birds, but it's like, yeah. He has all those kind of lines. And then he has these moments where he does actually come through. And not just in terms of competence, but in terms of like being a decent person. Morveer never comes through in terms of being a decent person, but he's telling everyone how amazing, and himself, how amazing a person he is. So I think it is that Morveer overpromise, underdelivers. Casca underpromises his own like good qualities and then overdelivers on them.
Hard to think of Casca's underpromising his own qualities.
On his positive, no, on his own positive like characteristics as a person.
I guess
like
he's just very he's very self-admiring. You know, he thinks very highly
but
of
he's
himself.
but in like, I'm famous, I did all these incredible things, I'm accomplished, he thinks highly of himself. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like, I'm loyal, I'm a good person, I help people, I care about people, he never says anything like that. But his behaviors completely indicate that he cares about Monza for sure. And lots of other people. And he taught Monza to read, dude. Yeah. Friendly, he cares about. He's frequently doing these things that indicate he cares about people, all the while telling people like, oh no, like, I don't care. I have no loyalty. That's honor, loyalty. I think at one point in the first Law Trilogy, he says something like, you can't eat it. Like you can't, I think he uses a word I can't use on our clean podcast, but I think he says, you can't F it, you can't, right? Yeah. You can't do anything with the idea of honor or loyalty, so what's the point of it? Right. And meanwhile, he has this like care and loyalty for Monza and friendly and a freaking goat. Yeah. And all these things that Morveer never shows. So, like, it's a weird thing to say Casca under promises because he's always saying how, I don't know. I think most of what he says he's great about, it's like stuff in the past. And then even when he's promising things, he's like, oh yeah, I told you I told you I would stop drinking. Like, ha ha ha, I'm just joking. But then he actually does stop drinking. It's like, I told you I'm going to get my life together. And then he does for a little while. It's like, I don't know. It's interesting because he's super.
People can change, but you know sometimes what is it? They change back.
I have that quote.
Yeah, and we don't need to get.
I can read it.
We can get into that when we talk more Casca later. But
do you want me to read the quote, or you want to wait?
We'll wait because we didn't really bring it all together.
Good.
But it is a great quote, and yes, Casca does change, but he also changes back very frequently, and we've seen the different states of Casca before, and it's good when he's riding the highs. It's fun to see him.
Oh,
so.
Can I make a different quote from Casca?
Okay.
I have frittered my gifts away on nothing. Self-pity and self-hatred have led me by unsavory paths to self-neglect, self-injury, and the very brink of self-destruction. The unifying theme, he asks? Yourself, says Monza. Precisely so. Vanity, Monza. And it's like these moments from Casca, that's what I'm saying, is like, he knows it. He knows that he puffs himself up and all those kind of things. And this guy is telling you all of these failures all the time. So he's just a very interesting and compelling character, I think, because sure, he self-aggrandizes constantly, but deeper than that is this awareness of all the things that he's done wrong and how he could do better. Does he change at the end of it? That's a conversation for later. But
yeah, that's well said.
Have I sold you at all, Charles? The Casca stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I never doubted you. I was with you the whole way. I just need a little extra context on what he's promising. And yeah, I mean, he would never admit to loving someone. He would never admit to being compassionate towards people. but he is. And I think that's
Yeah.
what we enjoy about Casca as a
love that
character, is the more we learn about him, the more we like, and the more we get these flashbacks of him with Manza over the years, the more we like him. And yeah, it's just one of those fun things. But we gotta be mindful of where we're at. This is a two-parter after all.
Yes.
And we're at a good spot in the story as Cardades burns to the ground and the gang rides to Visserine. That is where we're headed. Some fun stuff happening right at the start of the next episode. And you won't believe it until you see it, people.
Ooh. I think they'll believe it. They've read the book.
I was just trying to make an eye pun.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of... I'll get into it when we get... Yes, good tease, Charles.
Thank you. And before we talk ourselves into another hour and a half here, which we could easily do about this book, there's so much more plot to go. We're going to call it here for the day, and we will return to Best Served Cold very soon. We release 3 episodes a week, so you won't have to wait long for that part 2 to come out. For now, though, we hope you enjoyed the beginnings of this. Always a pleasure to be talking Joe Abercrombie with my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I feel the same exact way, Charles. I always just adore these opportunities, and I'm so grateful that folks are interested in hearing us talk about some of our favorite novels by one of our favorite authors in Joe Abercrombie, and it's an absolute pleasure sharing that with you, Charles.
Likewise, dude. It's good to hear. So, shall we not delay any longer and play that outro music?
Let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. This has been your co-host, Charles and Dylan, talking First Law with you guys today.
Yeah.
We're getting into the standalones. We are back and better than ever with Best Served Cold. If you like what you heard today, you want to hear more, you want to give us some feedback, best place to do that is over out there on Twitter at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. And we're also on Instagram at the FTF Podcast. Now, Dylan, if they like the show and they want to support the show even further than reaching out on Twitter or Instagram, and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just find that Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app. Click the Friends Talking Fantasy page and scroll down past those episodes until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, the optimal number of stars to click to support the show would be 5 of them. If you have a little bit of extra time and you want to go that next step of support, then writing a review is so helpful for a podcast like ours, but just listening is more than enough.
Thank you all so much for listening to us talk about First Law. We'll see you again real soon with Best Served Cold Part 2. But until then, guys, as always, go forth and conquer, friends.